You've seen this table before, the Mega Coffee Table. It's been in The Sims 4 since launch, and I think it really does look like it. It's chunky, it's very flat, a little bit clunky overall, but it has got that classic Sim style, the early vibes, if you will. So I wanted to see what would happen if I took it upon myself to rebuild this mesh from the ground up in 2025, using modern proportions, better materials, and making the texture look a little bit more wood-like rather than the flat, plasticky kind of vibe we have right now. So let's get to it. Let's fix EA's Mega Coffee Table. All right, so first thing we got to do, we got to set up the usual stuff in Sims 4 Studio. We're making a new mesh, so I select the Mega Coffee Table, the original one, as my base, because that makes the most sense to me. Once we export, we then go into Blender. Isn't this wonderful? So looking at the original there, I kind of like what's going on with those stripes down the middle, and I'm thinking about that kind of as I'm modeling this to think, okay, how can I keep that little motif? How can I tip the hat, so to speak, to that little detail? So what I actually started by doing here is removing the legs off the original, because I feel they were just way too chunky. There's too much going on there. In today's day and age, you can get coffee tables, and furniture in general can be chunky, but I much prefer the vibe of a softer, lighter kind of thing here. Looking at the tabletop, I've flattened that out quite a bit. I've halved it in size, inset a face underneath and pulled that down. We then take the top section and round that off. The legs themselves are a lot skinnier now. I'm kind of playing around with adding some beveling, so rounding those edges there to see if I fuck with the vibe or not. I kind of do, but in the end, I decided to keep them relatively sharp, but adapt this taper towards the bottom. Taper being as it kind of goes in towards the bottom. I still wanted to keep the shelf going on here. I've moved it up a little bit, made it thinner, and just kind of added a little bit more white space overall on the entire coffee table. There I was adding some stripes, some geometry on the top to keep that stripy kind of stuff that was on the original, but doing it this way means I can use that geometry as like a guide when it comes to texturing later, and you'll see that in a moment here. I'm working on the drop shadow right now. Because the feet are ever so slightly further apart than the original, I had to go into the drop shadow right there and move those little squares so they line up a little bit better. I wasn't happy with the overall height of the piece here. I was looking at proportions overall. Now I had my silhouette down, so to speak, the initial block out. You can see I'm kind of shifting it up, making it a little bit taller, trying to find like my my preferred height here. I think I like it here personally. It's a little bit taller than the original, not as flat, a little bit more space. So yeah, I'm happy with this result here. We're now going through and doing our UV unwrapping, which is these red lines here. Those red lines denote a seam. UV unwrapping, for those who don't know, really quickly, is the process of taking your 3D mesh, marking seams, and then cutting upon those seams during an unwrap to fold your mesh flat. When it's flat, we can texture it a lot nicer. And now we've done the UV unwrap, it is time to head on to the texture. All right, so here we are in Substance 3D Painter, my preferred way to texture 3D meshes. I'm starting off here with this preset wood that I have. I've played around with these values for a little bit, trying to catch a bit of a vibe. But in the end, I feel it's too far away from the Sim style. I prefer what you would say is Maxis Match, I believe is what the community call it. So I prefer a style which is closer to the Sims rather than this hyper-realistic or hyper-stylized kind of stuff. I'm still playing around here, and in the end I got rid of it and I started building up my own wood texture myself here. And the way I do that is I take these fill layers of different browns, different colors. Now the table itself is quite orange. I tone that down a little bit because I prefer more muted colors. And I keep copying and pasting these different layers, these different colors on top of each other. I've applied a smart mask on the top of these, which kind of splatters the color all over the mesh. And then I apply a directional blur, which is kind of smearing it across different surfaces. And as you start layering those on top of each other and changing the opacities, you kind of get this sort of grainy effect, but it's quite soft. It's very easy on the eye. Now I'm going to start introducing those stripes from the original using that geometry that I made earlier. that's kind of my guide. So I can select those long faces and have that pixel perfect straight edge. You can see I've gone for a darker in the middle and then getting lighter on the outside. Whilst texturing here, I had to hop back into Blender because I noticed a seam on the sides. There was a bit on the side of the tabletop where you could really see this horrendous like mark, like a line. Imagine you have a perfectly flat surface and then you just go scratch it. You see it on the corner right there. It just looks a little bit weird. Right here, I'm looking at some form of edge wear because I can see a lot of Sims meshes, sorry. They have this edge glow, not a glow as such, but they just have something to soften up edges instead of using geometry to round it off and bevel it. In the end, to get rid of that seam, I just colored the perimeter of the top face, that tabletop, in a uniform color, so everything was exactly the same, and then that seam disappeared very nicely. All right, back into Sims 4 Studio. Now the mesh is complete, our textures are complete. Now it's time to piece it all together in Sims 4 Studio. Really quickly before we do that though, we're going to zoom through this shadow mesh just so objects appear correctly behind it. If you don't, sometimes you get this weird like shadow ghosting issue behind it. We're importing our mesh over the top of the old one. Now you can see once we put our textures in, it starts to look very, very nice. I'm using a blank normal and specular map on this, which pretty much just controls how shadows and light impact the mesh. I've now sorted all that out. We're going to go to Sims 4, put it in our mods folder. We got our own custom package. And once this opens, we'll have a proper look, shall we? So here we are, ladies and gentlemen. A new take on an old classic from 2014, no less. Gone are the chunky legs and the weird side pieces. In with the new slim tapered legs, gone are the side supports. No longer are the stripes misaligned and not a similar size. We now have uniformity. The gradient is much finer and everything looks a little bit more contemporary. I understand this may not be to everyone's taste, but this is definitely a step in the right direction, in my opinion. Our goal was to try and modernize this old classic table, give it a modern twist, and I think we've achieved that pretty nicely. Thank you very much for watching, boys and girls. I hope you have enjoyed the video and maybe you learned a little something. Maybe it's just a good bit of second monitor content. If you did enjoy, please consider subscribing. I'd really, really appreciate it. Don't forget, you can catch me live on twitch.tv/just_Joe. Sometimes we do CC live, sometimes we play Sims, but there's also all kinds of other stuff going on. Super inclusive community. We'd love to have you. Until next time, thank you very much, boys and girls. I'll see you soon.